If you ever opened a historical riding book, you probably recognized one of these pictures. These pictures depict horses standing on their hind legs with their front legs raised in the air. And if you don't know that much about classical dressage or historical riding, you probably would mistake them for a rear type movement, something we would call a levade or a pissade. But in fact, these pictures depict gaits that are very similar to canter. You might be surprised by this, but many of the horses could move in any direction in these gaits as well. So in this video, I would like to talk about what these gaits were, what kind of gaits we had, and how to recognize them on old depictions. If you're new here, my name is Bart Hatteksveld. I'm a classical riding instructor, and my passion is to bring historical knowledge to the modern world with modern welfare considerations, so we can make our horses' lives better. So when we are talking about these canter-like gaits, what kind of variants are there? If you look in the historical literature, oftentimes we see that the terminology differs a little bit from period to period. In the 16th century, they used different terminology for these gaits as in the 18th century. Because people are more used to the terminology of the 18th century, this is also something I would like to use in this video. I will use the terminology as described by de la Gueriniere in his 1733 book École de Cavalerie. In his book, he describes three variants of these canter-like gaits, namely terre-à-terre, mezair, and courbettes. While these movements have slight differences between them, there's also a big commonality, namely that most of these movements are two-time, meaning that they have two phases. In one phase, the horse stands completely on the hind legs with their front legs raised in the air. In the other phase, the horse stands completely on the front legs and with the hind legs are raised completely in the air. The second phase is very uncommon to see depicted in the historical literature, but the first phase we see everywhere. So when you combine these phases together, you get a movement that alternates between those two phases. First, the front legs are raised in the air while the horse is standing on the hind legs. The front legs are lowered and the hind legs jump. After the jump of the hind legs, the horse lifts itself again in the air and it's standing again on the hind legs with their front legs in the air. Now in this case, we see me and my horse going forwards, but in many other cases, we can also go sideways or around the front or around the back in a pirouette. So there's a lot of variance that we can discover with this kind of movement. And I will talk about that later in this video. In terre-à-terre, the biggest difference is that there is a lead. Like canter, one pair of legs is slightly more forward compared to the other pair. In mezair and courbette, the front legs and the hind legs are both on a separate but parallel line. So if you see in the depictions that a horse is having the legs on one side slightly more forward, we can be sure that it was a terre-à-terre. The difference with a very collected canter is that the collected canter still stays in a 4-beat movement. First we have the hind leg coming on the ground, then the other hind leg, the inside hind leg, then the outside front leg, and lastly the inside front leg. In terre-à-terre, the front legs and the hind legs arrive on the ground at the same point. Now, the horse has to be quite collected to do these kind of movements, and so that's also why they're so good in training the horse and developing a lot of muscle mass on the top line. Unfortunately, we have forgotten these movements in the modern times, and they're not often seen, even though horses can do them. In fact, these are quite natural movements for the horse. We often see horses doing them in the pasture, or I've also seen horses that are not educated in a classical dressage sense do them spontaneously. Now, de la Gueriniere subdivides his exercises in those above the ground and those on the ground. Those above the ground include also school jumps, and those on the ground also include the canter. Terre-à-terre, according to him, is an exercise on the ground and not above the ground. Mézair and courbettes are characterized as exercises above the ground. This is probably because the horse is more raised up compared to in the terre-à-terre. In the terre-à-terre, the horse stays quite low to the ground, even though it's quite collected and the hind legs are very much under. He also writes that the terre-à-terre is never used forwards or backwards, but only sideways on two tracts. In a certain way, this disagrees with other authors that do use the terre-à-terre forwards and sideways and backwards, but this is some of the inconsistency that we see throughout the literature as well. Now, the mezair is slightly higher, and the horse bends the hind legs more. We can see that in the depictions of the mezair, the horse doesn't have a lead. Like I said before, the front legs and the hind legs are on the same line. The mezair is also called a half courbette. According to de la Gueriniere, it's a way to get to the courbette. We see it also throughout the 16th century depicted as well, and the 17th century. For example, in the 17th century, here in Pluvinel and his book, Le Manège Royal. Now, the mezair is something that the horse can prefer as well. De la Gueriniere writes that horses have different preferences, and some horses are more keen on doing the mezair, and some horses are more keen on doing the terre-à-terre. Kind of try out your horse and see what they prefer. That's his advice. The mezair can easily be recognized because the front legs are not completely folded. We see in many depictions that the horse also just doesn't have the time to fold the front legs. It's simply not standing on the hind legs long enough. We also see this nowadays, where horses fold their front legs a little bit less or a little bit more, depending on their preference. It's not something we necessarily have to teach the horse. In my experience, in my lessons, I've seen that horses kind of automatically fold their front legs or don't fold their front legs. They're quite good in coordinating their body in this way. Like I said, it's a natural gait, so it comes quite natural to them. Lastly, we have the courbette. This is when the horse is so much on the hind legs that they will stand there for a longer period of time. So when we compare the terre-à-terre with the mezair, the horse is longer on the hind legs in the mezair, and when we compare the mezair and the courbettes, the horse is longer on the hind legs in the courbettes. So the courbettes is an exercise where we see the front legs completely fold, and so when we see this in the literature depicted, we can also be sure that it is a courbette. In the courbettes, the horse has to energetically lift himself up, be quite long on the hind legs, and also energetically lift the hind legs up. Because we want to make the horse as movable as possible. Later on, we want to maybe move into a sideways direction as well. The hind legs have to lift enough to make enough travel so that the horse can actually travel around them. This also brings us to an important element of mezair, courbettes, and terre-à-terre. The horse needs a lot of cardio to do these movements. Because they're using almost all their muscles in their whole body, and they're using them with a lot of energy and a lot of power, it requires a lot of stamina and cardio for the horse to maintain these movements. This means that they are also very good in building these attributes in the horse, but they are also necessary for the horse to maintain these gaits for a longer period of time. Oftentimes, when we try to exercise the horses in the beginning, we only get 3 or 4 strides out of them, and then they simply don't have the cardio or the strength to maintain the movement. The horse also needs a lot of strength to lift itself up on the hind legs. It can't really use its front legs to help themselves to get up on the hind legs, because otherwise the movement will be different. We see then that the horse lifts their head up in order to push themselves off of the ground with their front legs. So it's a good muscle builder in the top line and in the glute muscles of the horse. This makes it just a really good exercise to do with horses in general. Lastly, the horse has to be quite supple also to move its body to one direction or the other. This brings us to the special exercises we can do in these movements. So, of course, we have on the place. The horse lifts itself on the hind legs, it puts the front legs down on the same place, it jumps with the hind legs on the same place, and it lifts itself up again. This means that the horse doesn't move in either direction. We also have forwards. Here the hind legs jump forward and the horse lifts itself on the front again. We can also do sideways, however. When the horse puts the front legs and the hind legs the same amount of distance to one side, the horse moves sideways. Of course, we can do it in either direction, in left or right. When you first start with the horse, oftentimes they have a preferred side. One side is very easy, the other side is very difficult. This combines with the straightness that we get from the side movements earlier on, and so we get the horse more supple over time, so we can do this exercise. Now, if we move the hind legs a little bit further than we do the front legs, we go around a corner, we make a sort of a circle. We can do the same when we move the front legs a little bit more compared to the hind legs. If we take this to the extreme, we make the hind legs stay on the same place. The horse turns the shoulder completely around the hind legs, and we do a pirouette in mezair or courbette. If we do the same with the front legs staying on the same place, we do a pirouette around the shoulders. This can of course also be done. There's no rule saying that we can't. Lastly, we have backwards. Backwards is one of the hardest things because we have to teach the horse that they have to jump the hind legs back rather than forward or sideways. We can start introducing this exercise by teaching them to go a little bit backwards in their circle work, where the hind legs don't completely jump sideways, but they jump a little bit back as well. Over time, this becomes bigger and bigger, and so the horse eventually will go backwards. This makes terre-à-terre, mezair and courbette some of the most versatile gaits around because we can move the horse in any direction. It is also some of the most fun I had on the horse. I'm always enthusiastic by doing some mezair or terre-à-terre or courbette exercises because it's just so much fun. I hope this video helped you in understanding a little bit about how to recognize these gaits on the historical depictions. If you have any questions or comments, please, I would love to see them down below. And thank you for watching. See you in the next video.